Kralen's hand was nothing more than a bloody stump. While Ghost hadn't taken it completely, he'd done the next best thing, and the hand would never be used again. Not that it mattered. Kralen would not live through this night. The maester had screamed louder than any man should, and when Oberyn had burned the hand to stem the blood flow, he had passed out. Though they didn't allow him the respite of unconsciousness for long, waking him, he looked at them all hatefully, but his laughing had stopped for good. "Ghost," Jon said, and the wolf moved forward again before the man shook his head and cried, and Jon stopped the wolf a few steps later. "Now you'll tell us everything, every last piece of knowledge you have about what you and your friends have been up to." I will. Please keep the wolf away from me," Kralen cried out. One lie, one omission, and Ghost continues, and this time I swear he won't stop at just a hand, Jon said, and Kralen nodded frantically. Oberyn looked at Jon impressed, while Jenna, even through her rage, showed some concern. Tyrion, though, just stared blankly at the maester, and he found his own concern torn between his brother and his king. When Jon turned to him and nodded before he walked over to whisper in Tyrion's ear, though he saw his brother's expression change, Tyrion left the room and walked to one of the guards, sending them to fetch some parchment. It took most of the night for Kralen to get through his part in things, their mother's murder, stoking hatred in his father for the dragons, though Jaime knew it only added to his father's own, and in the end nothing would have swayed his father's actions. One of the most surprising revelations was that he destroyed a letter from their mother to their father, a letter accepting a betrothal offer from Oberyn's mother for his marriage to Elia. His other actions in Casterly Rock were more benign, steering certain trade disputes a particular way to force his father to be even more severe in dealing with them. He, though, hadn't been the maester during the Rhaenys and Tarbeck's rebellion, which Jaime was disappointed about, hoping for one of his father's worst acts to be laid at the maester's feet. With Tyrion, he had whispered subtly in his father's ear, stoking his disdain and hatred for his brother. And Jaime placed his hand on Tyrion's shoulder when they heard him say it. While he didn't have much to do with the actual conspiracy to take down the dragons, other than his position at Casterly Rock, he knew some of it, though a lot of it was no doubt a guess based on certain events. The pregnancies, the stirring of bad feeling towards them throughout the realm. While they hadn't instigated the plotting of Jon Arryn or others, they had fueled it and tried to benefit from it. But their hatred and desire to get rid of Jon's family, and the dragons in particular, ran far deeper than any of them knew. The shepherd was one of us, a maester who lost his chain and claimed the faith. But he was our man, and the storming of the dragon pit, our finest hour until Duskendale, Kralen said, and Jon just glared at him. "You were involved in Duskendale?" Jon asked. Dennis Darkland was a weak man with an ambitious wife. A few choice words whispered in her ear by their maester, and she was repeating them loudly and over time more insistently to her husband. With Tywin in his hand, he'd not accept ascension and what they asked for, and so a plan was formed. Shafter, "So you plotted to have my grandfather imprisoned?" Jon said, and Kralen nodded. "We did more than that," Duskendale broke Eris. "But have you ever asked yourselves why? He wasn't treated as badly as most prisoners, and yet he broke there." "What did the maester give him?" Oberyn asked, and Jaime looked to him, seeing it clearly now. "I do not know, but it worked," Kralen said. "Names. I want the names of everyone you know is involved in this. All of them. Not a single one is to be left out," Jon said. "I'll not give up my brothers no matter what you threaten me with," Kralen said, summoning up some courage from somewhere. Jon didn't reply. Ghost did. The wolf was on him in a second, and this time he went for his face, his teeth bared and snarling. Inches from the maester had the desired effect, as well as a quite undesired one. The stench as the man's bowels loosened forced Jaime to gag. In the end, he was surprised. None of them ran from the room. Even his aunt managed to hold her own reflexes in. The names of the maesters meant nothing to him, and most of them were low down on the chain, Jamie would wager. 2 Archmaesters, one they already knew in Theobald, and the other, the Archmaester of Ravenry Walgrave, who it turned out was Whaley's father, and showed these people capable of using even their own kin to further their agenda. Once done, Jamie ordered the man cleaned and chained. It was dark outside, and he felt tired. And while he wished for nothing more than to kill this man where he stood, he'd speak to his family and king first. "I'll relay this to Olenna," John said as they were walking from the cells. "Maybe you should get some rest, John. It's been a hard day," Jenna said, and John smiled at her. "I will, but this is too important. We're all in this together, and Olenna will wish to know," John said, and his aunt nodded. "What do you wish done with him, nephew?" Oberyn asked. "He dies. How I leave up to those he harmed more than I," John said, looking at Tyrion, and he, "Just kill him. I care not how it's done, just kill him." Tyrion said, his voice shaky, and Jamie looked to Jenna, who nodded her agreement. "Fine. On the morrow, I'll carry out the sentence," Jamie said. John left with Oberyn after saying his goodnights, and Jamie, Jenna, and Tyrion walked into his rooms. He immediately poured them some wine, which Tyrion drained in one swallow, though Jamie was happy to see him sipping the next glass. They sat there quietly for a few moments, each of them lost in their own thoughts before Jenna broke the silence. "Our lives could have been so different. You know, so many people who should be here now, so different," she said sadly, "to those who should be here." Jamie said, raising his glass, "To Mother." "To Mother," Tyrion said. "Whoa, to Mother. To Mother." He crept silently into his room, trying not to disturb her. The illness had been quick and sudden, and if it were not for Jenna, then he'd have worried and panicked. Without knowing of the Maester's loyalty, they'd been unable to have him check on her, and had instead needed to send for a woman from Lannisport who had confirmed it. "I can hear you, you know that, right?" he heard her say, the mirth clear in her voice. "We weren't exactly trained in stealth, you know," he said as he quickly undressed. "Ah! Gods, you'd be terrible in the Wolfswood. Rabbits, hares, deer, all of them would run at the sound of the noisy lion," she said with a chuckle. "They are supposed to hear me roar after all," he said. And she laughed truly then as he climbed into the bed beside her. She lay on her side and he embraced her from behind, feeling his hands automatically and protectively go to her stomach. She turned her head to kiss his lips softly and then pushed back to allow him to hold her even more tightly. "Did you find out what you needed to know?" she asked. "Some of it, gods. Daisy, the things they did, and Kraylin wasn't even a big part of it. I'd shudder to think what Pycelle knows. Should something be done about him?" she asked, and he took her meaning wrong. "Kraylin will die on the morrow." "No, Pycelle, he's around your niece and nephews. Should something be done about him?" "Baratheon's children helped their cause, even if he knew the truth of them. It helps their cause, as long as dragons are kept away and the crown seems to have its future protected. They are safe." "Good. How did Jon take it, Tyrion?" "Badly. Tyrion hasn't let it out yet, but Jon, he's keeping it inside. He'll let it out when he's ready. For now, he's thinking of how to stop them. We should let him do that for a bit longer." "Maybe we should tell him?" "Aye, we should, but when you're ready, let's deal with this first. With Kraylin, with Tyrion and Oberyn leaving, and then if you want, we'll tell him." "Have you thought of names?" she asked. "Joanna for a girl," he said. And she nodded. "For a boy." "You picked the boy," he said. as she smiled. "I love you, husband," she said, kissing him softly. "I love you too, wife." Olenna. She and Marjorie had walked from the cells back to their rooms, her granddaughter concerned at leaving John alone, and had the situation been less important, then Olenna would have laughed. Both John and her granddaughter deferred to each other in certain ways. They both sought to comfort and make the other happy. When they finally realized what it was they truly felt for each other, she'd dare anyone to try and come between them. "Will John be well?" "Grandmother, dealing with that man?" Marjorie asked. "He will. He has Jaime and Jenna with him. Along with Tyrion and Oberyn, he'll be well, sweetling. I promise it. What they did to his family, he took it badly." Marjorie said sadly. "He'd told you of it?" she asked, knowing the answer already. "I went to his room after he found out he was there with Lady Jenna, and he spoke to me of it, of all of it. How could they do such a thing, grandmother? How could they?" Marjorie said angrily. "We'll fix this, Marjorie. We'll fix them all," she said, and her granddaughter nodded. "What of Lomis? We'll need to think on it. Not all of them are the same, my love, but we need to find out who is who. And until then, if you're ill, if you wish to send a message, then speak to me before you speak to him. You understand?" "I understand," she said back, and Olenna grabbed her and hugged her tightly. She left her back to her rooms and waited until she was in bed before she left, kissing her softly on the forehead and bidding her good night. Then she went to her own rooms and found herself sitting at her desk thinking and planning her next steps. The maesters were only part of it. There would be a response from the crown too. As she played over each possible course they may take, there was a knock at the door, and John was shown in. She was surprised to see him so soon, and then she realized it wasn't. She had been so lost in her thoughts that time had drifted by, unbeknownst to her. When John sat down, she could see he was tired, and though annoyed and aggravated, he held it well. In his hand he carried a list, and he handed it to her. There were maesters' names written down, and a couple stuck out immediately. "Walgrave. There was something about him a few years ago, my king. Him and one of the Hightower girls. Aye, his son was Wally's Flowers, the maester at Winterfell who killed my grandmother," John said, and she was glad to see him hold his anger in check. "One of these others is the maester at Horn Hill, Tarly's maester Arden." She said, and John looked to her. "Why put a maester in Horn Hill? Why not Highgarden?" She was silent for a moment, and then it hit her. How Tarly had always been so prickly around Mace, how he looked at Willis. She had put the first down to Ashford and Mace himself, the second to Tarly's abhorrence of weakness as he saw it. But thinking on it now, it could be more. Could they be sowing the possible seeds for having him turn his coat? Make him bitter enough that if the timing was right, he could go against her house? "My lady, House Tarly are one of our strongest bannermen, and Randall is ever prickly," she said, before John interrupted. "Ashford," he said, as she smiled. Indeed, Mace claimed the glory, but it was Randall who took the day. The man's held a grudge ever since. "You think they intend to replace you?" he asked, and she shook her head. "It takes a king's will to do that. So unless you have plans to do so, Your Grace?" she asked, half jokingly. "Never," John said firmly, and she felt a weight removed she didn't even realize she was carrying. Then perhaps they're just fueling discontent just in case. "We must treat any messages with Horn Hill as if they were going to the Citadel, my lady," he said, and she agreed. She'd also keep a closer eye on Randall once he knew the truth of John. He'd be no problem. Whatever ambition he may have, whatever lack of loyalty he may feel to her house, he'd not feel it to the dragons. He's to be executed on the morrow if he wished to attend, Jon said, and she nodded. I'd not have Marjorie there, my lady, he said, his voice softer now. She isn't the delicate flower, my king. But I agree for now this is not something she needs to see. Thank you, my lady, he said as he took to his feet and moved to the door. I am happy to have your counsel and your support, Lady Olenna. Jon turned to say too, and then a moment later, he left. It is yours always, my king, she said, meaning every word. Tarly could be a problem if events were different, but with the son of Rhaegar alive, with Arthur in his corner, and with a dragon, then Tarly would be happy to serve the dragons once more. But she'd need to both find out for certain about Lomies and to ensure their communications were not sent by Raven. She had been glad to see Gorman's name wasn't on the list, though whether this meant he wasn't involved or just that this maester didn't know of him gave her pause. She was up bright and early the next morning, left and right escorting her to where Jenna awaited before she nodded for them to stay here and wait for her. She and Jenna took the lift down to the base of the rock before walking for what seemed like an age. Ahead of her, Jon walked with Arthur and Jors, while behind them, his own giant guard carried something covered with a cloth. Ghost was nowhere to be seen, the which she found a surprise. When they reached the door, Jon's giant guard handed the cloth to Jors and stayed behind when they walked through, and she then saw the cloth was discarded on the ground next to a cage. Looking to Jon, she saw the dragon perched on his shoulder. It looked as if she'd grown too, and Jon seemed to be struggling with her weight when she chirped and took to the air, flying out ahead of them into the light. The beach they reached was completely enclosed, and both Jaime and Tyrion Lannister stood next to the tied-up maester. You're going to burn me. You're just like your grandfather, the maester shouted when he saw the dragon. I am nothing like my grandfather, maester, and you won't burn today. I wouldn't waste my sister's flames on you, Jon said. She looked on as Rhaenys flew to the sea and dropped down under the waves before returning a moment later with a fish caught in her mouth. All of them watched as she threw the fish in the air and unleashed a flame upon it before devouring it whole and dropping down to catch another, which she brought back with her and gave to the White Wolf. Ghost, it seemed, had been here all the time, the paw prints clear in the sand where he'd been running free. Jon looked unhappily as his sister and Wolf played together, Ghost eating the fish and Rhaenys chirping at the still silent Wolf. When Oberyn arrived a few moments later, Rhaenys chirped at him too, and the smile he gave the dragon was even more broad than Jon's own. I had worried I would miss this, nephew, Oberyn said, and Jon shook his head. We'd have waited, uncle. Lord Jaime, if you're ready, Jon said, and turned to hand him the blade Arthur had been carrying. Oh? Where? She heard the maester say as he looked to Dark Sister. You, maester, have learned your last piece of knowledge, Jon said as Arthur and Jors dragged the maester to the ground and placed him in front of Jaime. In the name of his grace, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, king of the Andals, Rhoynar and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, I, Lord Jaime Lannister, hand of the king, sentence you to die, Jaime said. And Jaime waited for the maester to speak his last words. You think this is the end of things. You think you can stop us, all of you here. Listen and listen. Well, we've been around for centuries and will be around long after you are all but dust on the wind, Crelin said. If I need to tear down the citadel brick by brick, if I need to kill every single maester, every acolyte, every man in training, if I have to burn the world down to see you and your kind pay maester, then I will. Bark, Jon said as Rhaenys chirped. Fire and blood, maester, fire and blood, Jon said. As the maester looked at him in terror, she saw Jon nod to Jaime, and then the sword fell, the maester's head coming off in one strike. Marjorie. Their time at Casterly Rock was coming closer to an end. In a few days it would be Loris's name day, and a few more after that would be Jon's. She found herself looking forward to both, and yet also wishing they were further away. While she missed her home and her mother and father, she had enjoyed spending time here. She had found joy to be growing into a clever young lady, and once Jon had told her of the girls' little tricks, had found them to be incredibly funny. Sansa. She had become even closer too, despite the age difference between them. Jon's sister was someone who behaved as if she was older, who Marjorie found she could have a decent conversation with, while like her cousins she could occasionally dream of the nights and tourneys to come. She also had a different, more simple way of looking at things, which reminded her of the times when she'd speak to Jon. But she knew the real reason she'd enjoyed it here, and he was presently making his sister enjoy laugh at her brother's expense. She looked at him, a large smile on her own face, as his hands moved over exaggeratedly, and his face puffed up. And then, just like Sansa in joy, she was laughing loudly. Loras was trying to look annoyed and failing badly, and Brienne and Cregan had stopped their spar to see what was going on. "I do not look like that," she heard her brother say, his face doing. "It's best to not smile." "Loras, you do." "We all know you do, Joy. How does Loras look when he's concentrating?" Jon asked. "Like this," Joy said, and puffed her cheeks out, making her brother laugh. "No, I don't." "Sansa." "Caw," Jon said, and she too puffed her cheeks out before he looked to her. "Marjorie." He said, his eyebrow raised slightly. She looked from him to her brother and couldn't resist. Filling her cheeks with air, she puffed them out as far as she could, and heard the laughter around the yard, even Cregan's uncle chuckling along. "See? Everyone thinks so," Jon said. And Loras just shook his head laughing as he walked away. Jon then walked over to her, standing close enough to whisper in her ear, "Thanks for playing along. Just Marjorie." "You're welcome, just Jon." They spent the rest of the day doing very little of anything. Jon had been able to begin to spar, but didn't, instead sitting with her while the others took turns facing each other. Sansa and Joy went off to their lessons, giving them even more time to just be together. As he was walking her back to her rooms so she could get ready for dinner, she knew then he was feeling the same as she was, that he too was upset. Their time together was coming to an end. That night after dinner, she found herself sitting in front of her looking glass, wondering on things, thinking of when she'd see Jon and Loras again, thinking how long would it be this time. She felt herself grow sadder the more she thought of it, and in the end she tried to put it out of her mind. As the days went on, and it got closer to the time though, each night she'd find herself combing her hair in front of the looking glass and feeling sad that they were one day closer to leaving. Waking up today, she found herself excited for what was to come. Jon had promised to take them all on a picnic beside the river, so breaking her fast, she ate only lightly and readied herself to the day. She met up with her cousins, who were all as excited as she was, and they made their way to where the horses were already waiting. "Your horse, my lady," Jon said, leading a beautiful pale white horse over to her and helping her mount. "I thank you, kind sir," she said with a giggle. She looked around to see Joy on apples, with Cregan and Sansa on their horses beside her. Loras was helping their cousins mount up, and Brienne was walking alongside while holding the reins of her own and Loras's horses. Seeing he wasn't needed, Jon mounted Winter, and nodding to Daeron and Jorah, they began to ride out. They went slowly at first, until Cregan rode over and challenged Jon to a race, getting an eye roll from Loras in return. "You don't want to race him. Not on Winter. Just give up now, Cregan," Loras said, though it had no effect. "He can't be that good," Cregan said, and Loras and Sansa sniggered. "Very well, on your own head be it. Don't say you weren't warned," her brother said. Jon looked to her to make the count, and as she reached one they set off, and it was instantly clear that Kragan was outmatched. Jon's connection with Winter was almost as strong as it was with Ghost or Rhaenix, he had told her. Looking at him now as he stretched the distance between him and Kragan, she could see it clearly, though he was also a far better rider than the other boy too. How he sat in the saddle, how he moved. It was far more natural than learned. He's the only one who could stand a chance against him, Loras said, drawing her attention to Ghost, who looked forlornly at the departing horses, though given the two smaller wolves at his side, he was right to stay with them. Both Fang and the black puppet grown, though, large enough now that they could freely go outside on their own, though this far from the rock they stuck close to their bigger brother. Loras race, she heard Joy say, and Loras shook his head before whispering to her, "She's almost as good as he is." "Loras race, please," Joy said, and Loras nodded and sighed. She watched as they set off, and Loras was right again. Joy too was a natural, and she could hear the girl's laughter as she pulled away from her brother. Ser Dayron headed off a moment later, and the rest of them looked at her, as if to see what to do. She just kept riding forward, and a few minutes later, Ser Dayron and Jon appeared in the distance. Loras, Kragan, and Joy, a little behind them, stopped and waiting for them. They rode back to her, and then escorted her and the rest to the river. Jon had been right. It was a beautiful spot. The tree offered shading, and the water ran slow enough that you could, if you wished, paddle in it. The food was laid out, and after they ate, she looked on as the three wolves played in the water, Ghost splashing the other two to growls and laughter. Jon took her for a walk down to the riverbank, and when they reached the shallow part, he led her across it, helping her stand on the little rocks that made a bridge. Ser Dayron walked with them, only a few feet behind, and as Jon led her to a hill, he asked her to close her eyes. When he told her to open them, she looked on in wonder. The rock was clear in the distance, but the way the sun hit it, how it reflected upon it, it looked almost golden, almost as if the entire gold of the West was there in one spot. Joy found this place when we were riding one day. On a day like this, it shines, he said, and she couldn't agree more. She saw him reach into his pocket and take out a small box which he handed to her. Looking at him in surprise, she wondered why he was giving her a present. "For your name day, you can open it now if you wish, or keep it for then." "Try him," he said, and she felt herself torn. "I'll wait. That way when I open it, it'll be as if you were there," she said, and he looked at her, a serious look in his face. "I would be if I could, but I will be in spirit," he said, and she smiled as they stood for a few minutes before walking back. That night, as she lay in her bed, the present Jon gave her in her hand still unopened, she began to think more on her name days, on other days she'd come to celebrate. She thought of feasts and balls of tourneys, and found her mind begin to drift. As she closed her eyes, she began to think of the things she'd seen when looking at the glass candle, and as she jumped up, she smiled. A wedding. She had seen a wedding, seen herself in her beautiful white dress on the day she married. She closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to remember the man she married, trying to remember had she seen him. She found to her disappointment she had not. But as she closed her eyes again, only one face came to mind, only one man she wished to spend her life with. She smiled as she held his present tightly, and as she fell asleep, she hoped she'd dream of being married to Jon. Joy. She hated her lessons, hated having to act proper and ladylike, having to answer the questions as Lady Joy Hill rather than as Joy. She knew her aunt wanted what was best for her, and that she would need to grow out of how she acted, but it was dull and boring, and she hated it. She much preferred playing with Balerion, playing with Jon. They knew, they understood. She was a child. Why couldn't they just let her be a child? You are a Lady Joy, and one day you'll be the Lady of Castamere. It's a great responsibility, and you need to be ready for it, Jenna said, and she nodded reluctantly. She had tried to play her games here, had hoped with Sansa and Marjorie coming to some of her lessons she'd be allowed, but Jenna had told the tutors, had told each of her teachers that she needed to behave. The maester let her play. He didn't seem to care. But he was gone now, and the tutors never had. When she did, they told her aunt, and even having Balerion scratch them wasn't enough to get rid of them. A cat was her true friend, he and John and Ghost, Loris too sometimes, and Marjorie, though Marjorie would take John from her, and then she didn't like her. Sansa too, at first she didn't like her. But then later, seeing her with Fang, seeing how John would speak to Sansa, and also to Joy making sure he spoke to them both, she found she liked her a little. Fang was fun though, as was the black pup. Even Balerion liked them. But it was the new person, the new boy. He was different. And Joy found she liked him best of all. Not as much as John, but almost the same. Cregan. His name was, and though Joy had tried to change it, she had found nothing worked. It wasn't like calling John, Jan, or Balerion Balin. It just didn't seem right. And so Cregan he remained.
He was fun like John was.
And he talked to her even more than Loris. He smiled too, a lot. And she liked that. Joy, are you paying attention? Carly asked. And Joy looked at the woman and saw Sansa try not to smile as she sat beside her. I am a purple unicorn. Carly asked. House Brax, Lord Andros Brax. Lord Tytos is his heir. She said, knowing it annoyed Carly when she answered questions she wasn't asked. House Cray calls words, none so fierce. Joy said, and Carly smiled at her. An orange burning tree on a smoky field? House Marbrand, Lord Daemon, Sir Adam is heir, and burning bright are their words. Joy said, and she was bored now. Well done. Perhaps you were paying attention after all. Carly said, and Joy rolled her eyes, which Sansa giggled at. Of course she was paying attention. It was boring and she hated it, but John had said it was important. Her papa had said it was important, and so even though she'd much rather be chasing Balerion through the castle, or riding apples with John and Loris and Cregan too, he liked to ride as much as John did. But he wasn't as busy as John was, so she and Apples had been able to ride more since he came. There were so many things she'd much preferred doing. But finally the lesson ended, and Joy couldn't wait to leave. It was John's name day today, and she had gotten him a present, even nicer than the one she'd given Loris a few days ago for his name day, though he had liked the coat John had taken her to get made for him. But John's was nicer. It was a book, just like the ones he read to her. But this one was about dragons. Tyrion had gotten it for her, and she knew John would like it. She had even wrapped it herself. She only wished the day would move quicker, be less boring as it was, and age until the feast would begin. Sans, what did you get, John? I made him something, Sansa said. Ah, handkerchief, she asked. No, something different. You'll see tonight, Sansa said, looking at her. What, please see? She said, giving her the best innocent look she could, the one which usually... Gods, you really can't wait, can you? Come on then, I'll show you. Sansa took her to her room and walked over to her chest. The present was beautiful. It was a cloak with white direwolves embroidered into the straps, black with fur on the collar. It looked both warm and not at the same time. It's beautiful, Sans. SSA, Joy said. Thank you. What did you get him? Not telling. Joy said, sticking her tongue out. Joy. Sansa said, and Joy giggled. Sans, she said, sticking her tongue out again. Sansa, though, was quicker, and she caught her and began to tickle, making her laugh louder and louder. I tell, she said when she had enough. What did you get him? Sansa said, pretending to be angry, and Joy laughed. Tyrion found me a book on dragons, about the conquest and how Aegon made the Iron Throne, she said, and bit her lip as she waited for Sansa to tell her if he'd like it. Jon will love that. He loves stories of dragons and of the Targaryens, of Daeron and the Dragon Knight, Sansa said, and Joy smiled in relief. If his sister said he'd like it, then he would for sure. She took a nap a little while later before Alessia came to wake her and dress her for the feast, Balerion running around her feet while she yawned as she woke up. Marla came and did her hair, and Alessia picked out her prettiest dress, and when she was ready, it was Cregan who came to collect her and lead her to the feast. He even carried Jon's present in his hands, and Balerion never even scratched him. And so they all walked to the dining room together. Jon, before coming to the Rock, Jon didn't really have name day celebrations. Robb did, and even Sansa had one he remembered, but he didn't. He'd receive his gifts while breaking his fast. Then his uncle, and he would sit and speak in the Godswood. He really loved that time together, and so didn't think much on it. Since he came to the Rock, though Jaime had always made a big deal about it, his, Joy's, Loras's, all of them receiving the same type of celebration. Loras's a few days ago was just like the one he was going to now, though his friend was now 10-2 while he was 10-1, but still it had been no different. A feast and presents. Jon had gotten Loras a suit of armor. He had it engraved with roses, and it was a silver that was polished so well it sparkled, and Loras had loved it. Cregan and Brienne had looked on jealously, and that alone he knew would make the present mean even more to Loras. Now that his own was upon him, he felt nervous and excited. He had spent the day with Rhaenys, allowing Sorella to go spend some time with her family. They would be attending tonight too, and he looked forward to seeing them again. Rhaenys had been happy with his company. She and Sorella got on, but they made no progress with speaking together, other than Rhaenys being able to show when she was hungry. You're growing, brother, as am I. Soon it will be time, Rhaenys said. Does it scare you, Rhae, knowing we may need to go to war? Yes, for those you care about, I feel worry. For you, though I feel fear, I get scared thinking of you being hurt. I won't be, we won't be, he said, stroking her neck. Promise me you won't leave me, Jay. Promise me you'll never leave me alone. I promise, sister, where I go, you go. Where I go, you go, she repeated. Are you worried about tonight? I'm excited, Jay. We'll have a brother soon. I wish it was Egg, he said sadly. We'll see Egg one day. All of us, father, mother, Lyanna, all of us will be together one day. One day, he said and hugged her, making her chirp loudly. Go, brother, go get your presents, she said, and he laughed as he left the room. Outside, Walder and Joyce waited, Arthur having taken the night off at his request, as he wished for him to sit with his family and to enjoy the night. He looked to his two knights. They had said their vows a few weeks ago, both forming their houses and naming their words. My words are, we run with the wolves, Jorah said as Arthur anointed him with the oils. My words are, like the wall we stand tall, Walder said, looking at the two men. He was proud of them both. They deserved it more than most. True knights, each of them. And just like the two knights who fell defending him as a babe, just like the two who fell with his father, they deserved the white cloak more than any others. They walked down to the dining room, and though it was a small feast, it was still a feast, and the room itself was full. Oberyn, his daughters, and Ilaria were there, as was Arthur, Ashara, and Cregan. Lady Melisandre and her guards he'd asked to come, even though they would leave to make the preparations for later. Gurion had arrived only that evening, and he had been glad to see him, though not as much as Joy, who was peppering her father with questions. Olenna, Marjorie, and her cousins had come too. though not all would be staying for the whole night. Finally, we were going to start without you. Tyrion said to laughs as he took his seat. The presents were first, and Jon was overcome by the thought which had gone into them all. Jaime and Dacy gave him an ironwood shield emblazoned with an image of Ghost so accurate that he knew should he leave it on the ground, Fang or Dusk would come to it thinking it their brother. Loras gave him an ash bow. It was longer than most and perfectly formed, and he couldn't help but smile at the thoughts of practicing with it. He was stunned when Oberyn gave him a present. The knife was longer and thinner than his own, with a fierce point that Oberyn said would pierce armor, which he didn't doubt. Cregan's was more simple, but the wood carving of Ghost was really well done, and knowing he'd done so himself was more special. Tyrion presented him with a present from all 3 of the remaining Lannisters. It was a silver lock box, just the perfect size to place letters in, and Jon thanked them all for the thought. Jon present. Joy said, handing him the wrapped book, which when he opened it, almost brought tears to his eyes. Thank you, Joy, he said, hugging her tightly as he held the book in his hand. The 3-headed dragon pictured on. Sansa came next, and the cloak was magnificent, his sister's handiwork exquisite. Thank you so much, little sister. It's beautiful. I love it, he said, and it was Sansa who hugged him tightly. He saw Marjorie nervously approach him, and the present she gave him was incredible. The locket was engraved with a wolf on its front, "Winter is coming," written underneath, but it was the dragon on the back which was special. Seeing it there, its white body and blue wings, it was Rhaenyk's, and underneath his sister, his house words were written in red and black, fire and blood. Thank you, Marjorie. I shall treasure this always, he whispered in her ear as he hugged her, holding her close. Thankfully, Tyrion chose that point to have the music begin, and it being his name day, no one asked him to sing. They listened while the dishes were readied, and then they ate. As with Loras, most of the dishes served were his favorites, which for Joy means sweets galore, which kept her very happy. He sat and talked to Marjorie and Sansa, showed off his shield to Loras and his bow to Brienne. The girl had been embarrassed to not have a present for Loras, and so Jon had told her not to have one for him either. Next year we can share presents between us all. Brienne, each of us on our name day, and we'll have known each other longer, so we'll be able to know what it is we all wish for, he said, and she smiled, relieved. As the night went on, he took Joy to her room, surprised when she asked him to bring Cregan too. Even Loras came as he read her story to her. He nodded to Walder and to Lady Melisandre, and they left to prepare, and then he enjoyed as much of the night as he could. He danced with Sansa and Marjorie, and even Sorella and Tyene at one point. Brienne he needed to drag to the floor, but in the end she smiled and laughed, and then Cregan and Loras danced with her too. Eventually Sansa went to bed, and then they all bid their good nights, Brienne heading to her room while the others headed to the lift. Jon walked with Olenna and Marjorie, and he and Loras escorted them down as if they were taking them back to their wing, when in reality it was another destination they had in mind. Olenna had looked at him strangely for a few days after Craylin's execution, and it had taken him some time to realize why. My lady, those things I said to the maester, they were to hurt him, to cause him pain, to make his last moments as bad as possible. I did not mean them, nor would I do them, I swear it, Jon said. After that, she had seemed more relaxed, and Jon had spoken to Jaime and the others just so they knew it to be true also. Tyrion had actually been disappointed, though it had soon become clear it was because he was still hurt by what they'd found out. When they reached the bottom, they began the long walk. Making their way outside, he saw Melisandre had done her work well. The egg sat on a pile of the stones, the birthing nest she had called it, and now it would just need fire and blood for the dragon to rise. The blood was his own, and he knew Arthur and Jaime as well as Marjorie would be upset at seeing him cut his hand, but it needed to be done. As for the firewell, she was presently flying around the small cove, happy to be free. Oberyn and his daughters were looking on, Sorella with parchment and quill ready to take notes, though these would be kept under lock and key. Ashara and Cregan watched as Melisandre finished her work. Jaime held Daisy tightly, while Tyrion, seeing the egg, looked on excitedly. Geryon and Jenna looked to him, and then the egg, and then the dragon flying, and he could clearly see the moment they knew what was to come. I wanted you all to be here when this was done, to see it for yourselves. Some of you were there when Rhaenys was born. This will not be like that. Bringing my sister back into this world was a different thing. It required more magic, more time, and more blood. This dragon is different. He said and looked to see the relief on Arthur and Jaime's faces. Jaehaerys Targaryen is the prince that was promised, the Lord's chosen, and he will wake dragons from stone, Melisandre said, and Jon saw the uncomfortable looks on Oberyn, Olenna, and Marjorie's faces. My mother and father called me the promised prince and said I was prophesied, the song of ice and fire. I am both, a wolf and a dragon. I will choose my own faith, my own path, as is the right of everyone, Jon said, and saw Oberyn nod and Olenna smile. He moved forward and took out the knife and held it to his hand, cutting his palm. He allowed the blood drip over the egg and then called for Rhaenys. Dracarys. Dracarys, he said, and watched as the nest and egg were lit alight, the flames catching quickly. He held his hand over the flames and allowed more of his blood drip, the flames rising higher and higher. And then he stepped back and waited. The flames rose into the sky even higher, and then in the blink of an eye, they were gone. He looked to the nest and saw it then, heard its cry and felt it in his mind. Father. The bronze dragon said, and Jon bent down to pick it up, placing it on his shoulders. He turned around to show the others and saw the looks on their faces, none so bright and full of awe as Melisandre and her guards, who looked to the bronze dragon as if it was gift from their god. Sorella too was staring at the dragon, as was Tyrion, who almost took a step forward, and Jon felt the bronze dragon move in his hands as he looked at him. Rhaenys though flew close, and so Jon introduced her to her brother, the two dragons chirping. Though Jon couldn't understand the bronze, Ligeron, Jay said, and the bronze dragon chirped happily at his name, Oberyn. Seeing a dragon being born had been something he'd remember for the rest of his life. Seeing how Jon held it in his hands, how he birthed it as if it was nothing, was something he couldn't explain. But despite the wonder, despite the majesty of it, there was one thought that stayed in his head from that night. The Red Priestess was too close to his nephew, too close by far, and it worried him. So he had resolved to speak to them both, starting with her. Jaime had arranged it, and he was sitting in the room waiting for her to come in. Her guards would wait outside, and if he thought she meant his nephew harm, he'd end her and them this day. He and Tyrion would leave on the morrow. So today was about saying his goodbyes too. Ilaria and his girls were with Sorella, and once he was done here, he'd go speak to Jon and his niece before a family dinner with all his girls. Prince Oberyn. He heard her voice as she took her seat, surprising him as he couldn't recall her entering the room. Lady Melisandre, he said with a polite nod. You wish to speak to me of the prince, she said, and he looked at her wondering how she knew. I do. You believe I may harm him. How do you know? He asked curiously. Whoa! Were it not already clear to me how much people care for my prince, then R'hllor would no doubt have shown me, but I have eyes I can see. You worry for the prince, but you have naught to fear from me. I have dealt with your kind before, my lady. I know of the things you do. You think the prince capable of sacrificing to the fire? You think R'hllor would have his chosen behave in such a way? I do not doubt Jon. It is you, my lady, who concerns me. Oberyn said, and she smiled. You have nothing to fear in relation to me, Prince Oberyn. I serve my lord, and my lord wishes me to serve his chosen. I will offer counsel when asked and support when needed. But he is my prince. He is who my God has chosen. My life belongs to them both. You would die for Jon. Without question, I would kill for him too, if it were asked of me, as would you not? I would. Then, Prince Oberyn, we are on the same side. He watched a woman leave and felt no better than he did when she entered. She had said a lot of the right things, but still pure devotion was a dangerous thing. He needed to speak to Jon. So he left the room and took the lift to the family wing. Walking to the room, he saw Arthur standing outside. How he felt about the man was still something he had no desire to examine. He blamed him, and yet having him here filled him with a confidence that his nephew, his niece, would be safer than without him. Is he inside? He is. Alone. Just him and the dragons. Arthur said with a smirk, and Oberyn knocked and then walked inside. As he entered the room, he couldn't help but chuckle. Jon was laying on the bed talking to the two dragons. Rhaenys looking at Lygaron and chirping noisily at the orange dragon, who was chirping back just as nosily. If you both speak together, then how am I supposed to understand? Yeah, I know, but she's your sister. Yes, she is, bossy. What? You know you were Rey. All right, you can play for a few more minutes, but your sister is right, you need to rest. Oberyn just looked on as the bronze dragon flew in little small hops, almost. From the bed to the table to the chair to Rhaenys' chest, forcing loud chirps from his niece. He's a child, Rey. Let him play a little, Jon said, and Rhaenys took to the air and flew over to the bronze dragon, and they began to chirp at each other again. Uncle, I'm sorry I didn't see you come in, Jon said, jumping to his feet. Sorry, nephew. Did I come at a bad time? No, Uncle. I've just been getting glimpses of how my sister would have behaved if our lives had turned out how they should have, Jon said, and Rhaenys chirped in response. See, he said. And Oberyn laughed. I'm heading to Old Town on the morrow, Jon. I wish to speak to you first. It'll have to be here, Uncle. I can't leave them both. It's about Melisandre, Jon. I've dealt with the Red Priests. I dislike having her this close to you. Her God sent her, Uncle, and she helped me with Lygaron. I know that, Jon, but these priests, the things they do, the things they've done. I'm well aware, Uncle. I spoke to Thoros, to Arthur and Ashara. They both spent time in their temple in Volantis. I've even read the books. Rhaenys trusts her, and so do I. But it's not my God, Uncle. While they can help, they're not for my gods or my priests. I just worry, Jon. Thank you for worrying for me. But on this, I swear there's no need. My gods are the old gods. It's how I was brought up. As king, I need to learn and at least seem to follow the seven. As for the Red Priests and Roar, I don't know why they're interested in me, but as long as they behave by the rules here, then I'll allow them to stay. As you say, my king, Oberyn said, and Jon laughed. Not you too. Are you all set for the Maesters? I am. We'll speak to Marwyn and find Loa Mara. You're sure of this, Luwin? I am. Good. We'll need to make ready for a new Maester. I'll see if Marwyn can help us there. Oberyn said, Be safe, Uncle. You and Tyrion don't risk yourselves. We'll find these men. But you and Alaria, Tyrion, you're more important to me than revenge. And Oberyn smiled before hugging him. Have no fear, nephew. I intend to see you crowned, to see the stag and falcon fall, to see our family avenged. As do I, uncle. Renix flew over and wished him well too and asked him to come back here before he went home to Dorne, which he agreed to, and then as he left the room he turned to Arthur. Watch over him, Arthur. Watch over them both. I will, my prince, Arthur said, and he left. Jon, the day he'd been dreading had come, and each moment it drew closer. Each moment that passed, he felt his heart grow heavier. The pinnacle ship was ready and waiting, and the ride from the rock was to be early, so they could catch the tide. Yet Jon found himself moving slower than ever, almost trying to fight time itself. Having Sansa here with him, having Olenna to offer him advice, getting to know Oberyn and Ilaria and his cousins, all of it was something he had enjoyed immensely. But it was spending time with Margaery, seeing her every day, knowing he could have dinner with her, or spend time with her, that had been the highlight of his days these past few months. She had comforted him when he was upset. Just being able to speak to her about the things in his head had been incredibly helpful. He had so many people around him who could help him with things, and yet it was Margaery he found he spoke to about most of what really bothered him. Knowing she was going to leave today, that it would be moons until he saw her again, had even Rhaenys and Lygeron feeling sad, sensing his mood. But worst of all was something he had come to realize these last few weeks. That thought, which wouldn't leave his head, and which had formed into a dream and hope for the future. Ever since dealing with Creelin, it was there, and it made him excited and terrified that the Maester would, in the end, turn out to be right. A bastard in a rose. It'll never happen, bastard, no matter what you may think. The more time he spent thinking of it, the more it became clear that it was what he wanted for himself. One day he would sit on the throne, and while he had never given it much thought, he wouldn't be alone. There would be a queen beside him, a queen he now knew could only be one person. For Jon, there could only be Margaery, and the thought of it wouldn't leave his mind no matter how hard he tried. It had made some of their times together more awkward than they should have been. At times he found himself looking at her and noticing different things he had taken for granted. He knew she was pretty, but he found himself more sure of it, more certain that she was in fact beautiful, and that made it hard for him to look at her sometimes. Hugging her, dancing with her, where once it had felt so natural, sometimes it felt a little harder to do so, a little uncomfortable as his mind replaced his friend with a future queen. He shook his head at these thoughts and made his way to the carriages. Margaery would ride with her grandmother and Sansa, while Jon would ride Winter. By the time he arrived, they were already ready to go, already in the carriage, and they set off immediately, eager to make it to the ship on time. The ride to Lannisport went quickly, far too quickly, and he found himself standing by the ship far too soon. "Be careful, Tyrion," he said. And Tyrion nodded before going to say goodbye to his brother. "Jon, I'll see you soon. Take care of yourself, nephew," Ilaria said, and she hugged him tightly. He did the same to Oberyn, and found himself speaking to Olenna as Sansa and Margaery said their goodbyes to Loras and Joy. "I look forward to seeing you again, young man. No doubt we'll have much to speak on when I do," Olenna said, and Jon smiled at her. "I thank you for everything, my lady. I'll not forget your kindness nor your advice." "I'll look after your sister, Jon. You have no need to worry on her," Olenna said, seeing him look to Sansa and Margaery. "I know that, my lady." When he saw Sansa come, he wasn't surprised to see the tears in her eyes, nor that while she started to walk to him, she ran the last few feet. "I'll miss you so much, big brother, so much," she said as the tears fell. "And I, you little sister, you're going to love the Reach, Sansa, and they you. You will write, and I'll come visit as soon as I can. I swear it," he said. And she hugged him closer. They stood there for a few minutes, Jon holding his own tears at bay while Sansa composed herself. Finally, it was time to say goodbye to Margaery, and Jon felt his heart in his mouth when she came to him. He looked at her, seeing that she seemed just as eager as he to speak, and yet neither could seem to find the words. "I shall miss you." "Just Joan," she said, giving him a warm embrace, one which he found he didn't wish to end. "I shall miss you too, just Marjorie." In the end, it was all they said, and as he watched the ship sail away, he felt himself a coward. He should have told her it all, told her everything. He had promised no lies between them, no half-truths. But in the end, he couldn't tell her the biggest truth of all. She was his future, his hopes and dreams. She was his queen now and always.